Hi, my name is Peter Andras. I am a professor at Edinburgh Napier University. This is my lecture series on the evolution of complex systems. This is lecture 8, Politics and Law. This is part 1 of lecture 8. In this part, we will look at society, and within the context of society, we will consider politics. And we will define the political system as the information subsystem of the society, and then we will consider how this political system and how politics is organized. So, let's start with human communications. As we discussed earlier, society is made of human communications. And we see society as the system of such human communications which reference other human communications. Now, human communications is mostly delivered through human language, which is a very specialized behavior pattern, which involves the generation of modulation of vibrations in the air, which are passed on through the air to other humans and trigger some interpretation of these vibrations. And in this way, we can communicate through the human language, which is quite different from the behavioral languages of other animals. There are specialized brain areas which deal with the language production and language understanding, the Wernicke and the Broca areas. And as we discussed, there are a number of human languages, and each language defines its own human society. And overall, today we have a global human society through the cross communication between these various linguistically defined societies. So in the society, you have many organisms. Each organism acts as a communication unit. Where you abstract away from what happens in this communication unit, so what happens within the organism to drive the communications, and you see the society as a system of communications characterized by the rules of referencing and continuations which describe how these communications are generated. In particular, the human society, it is the system of the human communications. And as we said, each human language defines its human society. Now, if you look at politics, in each human society, you can see some kind of political decision-making. This is really the decision-making about how the society works. So let's have a look at how politics worked at different times in human societies. If you look at early times in tribes, in simple tribes, everybody participates in decision-making kind of egalitarian manner, if you like. And these decisions are about what to do. For example, should they hunt, or should they move on, or should they settle? And also about how to interpret the environment. So, for example, how to interpret changes in the weather, how to interpret observation of certain animals, be them predators or prey animals, and so on. So the decisions are about how this very relatively small society should work, and how should it interpret its environment. So what kind of actions should they do, and what kind of perceptions should they draw from their experiences in their environment. In this context, the tribe leaders lead the decision-making. However, everybody participates in these decision-making, or many members of the tribe participate. Now, if you look at large tribes, like large migratory tribes, like Huns, Gepids, and others, what you see here is that there is a specialization. So there are the fighters who lead the actions of the society, both in terms of hunting, but also in terms of conquest and defense. And there are the priests or shamans or the equivalents who specialize in the perceptions of the society, in the interpretation of the environmental impacts on the society. And This specialization helps these larger, more advanced tribes to deal better with their physical and social environment. If you look at early states like Egypt or the Greek city-states, or many other states in the Middle East and elsewhere, what you see is that of course, there are still the fighters and the priests which specialize in actions and perceptions of society, but there are also administrators, specialist administrators who manage the system. So the administration, what they do is constitutes a system of the rules about decision making. So, for example, how they select the next ruler, how they organize the armies, how they organize harvest, how they organize the building works, and so on. So there is a group of administrators, which often originates as a subgroup of the priests who specialize in managing the rules of the society. Then if you look at early large states like Rome or China, what you see there, these are relatively large and relatively stable. They're large even by today's standards of size of states. And they have quite elaborate rules of politics and elaborate rules of law in general, which tells how disputes over resources can be resolved, how disputes about processes can be resolved. And generally, these societies have large administrations, much larger administrations than other societies with simpler and smaller states. If you look at more modern integrated states, integration means that they're not just simply hold together as it was in the ancient times, China or Rome or Egypt, but rather there is a uniformity. Integration through uniformity in these societies where the same rules, same patterns of working and decision making apply across the whole society. So, for example, if you consider England in the 17th, 18th century, Germany in the 19th century, France in the 17th, 18th century, and these countries become kind of integrated kingdoms. Now, in these states, there was a quite complicated system of political decision making about what happens with state taxes, how taxes are collected, how the taxes are spent, how the army is managed, how foreign policy is managed, and so on. So this political decision-making process gets more complicated. Also, it gets more institutionalized. There are institutions established, the kind of permanent feature of these states, which are dealing with decision making, and they get a uniform legal system, so the same laws apply across the whole land, belonging to the kingdom. So, for example, some establish parliaments, they establish parties, and they establish, importantly, kind of a stable public administration based on elaborate rules and laws. If you look at more recent times, democratic states like the US or states in Northwest Europe, Canada, Australia, and a number of other countries, what you see here is that the political decision-making process gets much more complicated. There are a number of parties, there are elections, there are a number of institutions involved in the management of the society. These societies are characterized by rule of law, which means that there is an established body of laws which change relatively rarely and which are applied in a uniform and general manner across the whole society. Quite often, these countries and states have constitutions. Sometimes this is stated explicitly. Sometimes it is based on a number of laws set in the past, and importantly, they have a large professional public administration. Where professional means that these are made, say, people participating in these public administrations are people who train to become public administrators, and they have a full professional career path within the public administration, where they get more experience, more trained, and they progress. And the public administration, the management of the state, the management of politics, and of the implementation of politics is done by this professional body. Now, that gives you a kind of brief overview of a number of key stages of how politics was organized over the past millennia. So if you look at across all these, what you see is that essentially politics, how the political system of a society is organized, that provides a description of the system of the human communication, of the society itself. Essentially, it tells you how to manage the memories of human communications, how to manage memories of what humans remember about their events, but also how to manage artifacts, and in particular written memories of human communications in order to operate that society, to maintain a society, to reproduce and expand this society. So generally, the political system, what it does, it describes how to interpret environmental events, how to act, and how to allocate resources. But that's really important, that the allocation of resources are key, because that tells you which communications should be used to generate further communications in one or another possible way. The political system in this way defines the identity of the society. The actions of the political system are things that happen through human communications. So these are the answers to the question of what to do, how to distribute human resources, how to organize human communications to deliver changes to the environment. So, for example, where to build a road, where to build a wind farm, when should the country wage war, or a tribe wage war against another one. So these are the actions of the political system. On the other side, the perception of the political system are about collecting information and interpreting information about the society and its environment. So this is the interpretation of what's happening in the society or with the society. So this is, for example, collecting information about the weather. How is, let's say, global warming impacting the society? Or if you look at the past, collecting information about where to mine, where to establish a salt mine, for example, where to build dams, how to manage the waterways, where to build channels, and so on. Which is based on the perceptions of where these are needed, which are based on perceptions about how the environment is impacting on the society. So the perception part is interpretation of what is happening with society and the decision of how to do these interpretations. Now, the political power is the power about deciding on the actions and perceptions. So this is the power to decide which interpretations are the right interpretations of communications within the society, which lead to the actions of the society and which lead to the perceptions of the society. So you see, the language of the society defines the society in general. However, within that wide definition, the society needs to make choices about how how it delivers its action on its environment and how it makes its perceptions about its environment. And these choices are driven or are set by through the political power. Um, so the power is really the ability to determine what should be referenced in the context of communications about resources. So these resources are resources which are used for delivering of actions, and also the resources that are used to interpret the perceptions. And the power is the ability to determine how these resources, human communications, are used for the action delivered and for the perceptions. So ultimately, the power defines is defined by the logic of selections of methods to manage memories of human society. So you have a number of options of how to manage the memories of human society, and the particular way that a society decides to follow, that defines the logic of power in that society, how power works in that society. And in this way, the political system manages the information within the society, and it is the information subsystem of the society. And as information subsystem, it defines the identity of the society. It describes a model of the society. Now, if you look at communications in politics, you see that the political talk is a subset of the society. Now, everybody participates in this political communications to some extent. In today's societies, voting in elections or participation in political organizations, attending political meetings are ways of communicating within the political subsystem of the society. In earlier societies, there were other ways of participating, and in some societies, some humans were not participating very much. But in general, most humans had some way, even if that way was relatively minor and with little impact, to participate in the political subsystem of the society. Now, if you look at this language, it has a specialist language which has much sharper communication rules than the regular language. And the key criterion of what counts as a political communication and what doesn't is that political communications have to be relevant from the perspective of the power. It has to be relevant from the perspective of deciding of how society acts and how society perceives its environment. So if a communication leads to more power, more ability to influence these decisions about actions and perceptions of society, or a communication which may lead to less power in this sense, those communications are part of the political system because they are aligned with this logic of power. For example, voting is aligned because it impacts which party, which group has more power in the sense of determining how society acts and how society perceives its environment. Having a chat with your friends may not have this impact, so that might be outside of the political system. Now, in general, in the political subsystem of the society, political communications reference mainly other political communications. So, for example, when you go to vote, the voting itself is referencing earlier political communications, for example, political advertisements, speeches at meetings, and so on, that reach the person who is expressing their vote at elections. And there are relatively few communications that reference other outside of the politics communications. Of course, there are these communications as well within the political system, but most of the communications are about referencing other political communications. So, as you said, all communications in the political subsystem follow the logic of power of that particular society. So how the political system is organized, how the rules of the political systems work, that defines the logic of power in that society. And all political communications have to be aligned with logic of power that defines a society. So, as I said earlier, all political communications have to make sense in the context of gaining more power, losing power, or preserving power. And all communications that can be understood in this context are political communications. So, this gives you another way of looking at a system where you can identify a guiding logic along which all the communications are organized, which provides a core reference to these communications. And in that way, it's a kind of fundamental axiom of the system. So in this case, you have the logic of power for a given political system, and that defines how political system is built. That defines how the information subsystem of the society works. And that defines the society itself, which is one particular possibility of defining the society within the context of the linguistically defined and determined society as a system of communications. So, in the political system, all social communications are organized around the logic of power. And these communications follow the referencing rules of the politics, which are again aligned with the particular logic of power, which is chosen in that society. And in this way, the political communications are communications about the society and power, which is the interpretation of communications within society, the processing of information within the society. So the political subsystem constitutes the information subsystem of the society, and identity of this political subsystem is defined by the logic of power that is used to build this political subsystem within the society. The boundaries of the political system are defined by the frequency of communications, the frequent referencing to communications within the politics, to other political communications, and they are relatively rare referencing to non-political communications. It is important to say that this is part of the society, so there are references to non-political communications, but most of the references are to other political communications. And the logic of power defines this boundary because, as I said earlier, this is what defines what is seen as political communication and what is not. Anything that is aligned with this logic is political communication, and like others are not. Now, the political communications form patterns that have an action on the environment. So, for example, decisions about where to build highways or decisions to build where to build wind farms. These are all actions of politics, but also decisions about how to manage property rights, decisions about how to finance healthcare provision. So these are all about allocating resources, allocating human communications, human behaviors within society, and these are all actions of the political system. The perceptions of the political system are changes in the political communications induced by changes in the environment. So, for example, if people in an area, kind of local influential groups, change their views on some environmental aspects. So, for example, if the views which previously were opposing wind farms because they were seen as destruction of the local nice views, change, and people realize that actually wind farms are needed for energy security. And they change how they talk about wind farms. Their objections on the grounds of destruction of views recede, and more people become more accommodating and supporting towards setting up wind farms. That will change the behavior of the local MPs. They will change their voting behavior, and that will have an impact on how political decision making is done. For example, in that context, it may lead to establishment of a local wind farm, which may provide more energy resilience regionally. Now, the meaningful communications in the context of political system are the ones which reference other political communications, provide reference for further political communications. So they follow the rules of the political communications with the identical system and contribute to the maintenance and growth of the political system. On the other side, the meaningless communications are the ones which do not lead to continuations. These are faulty communications which do not fit in the context of the political system. So, for example, in general, anarchist communications which generally question any political system are such faulty communications because these do not follow the rules of the political system. In fact, aim to undermine these rules of the political system, aim to disestablish the political system. So clearly, these are meaningless communications. Although it is important to know that these are meaningful human communications, just that they are meaningless in the context of the political system. So, for example, if you look at revolutions, so these are communications about power, but they don't follow the established rules of the political system. They don't follow its logic. So, for example, if you look at the 1917 revolution in Russia, those communications which led to the taking of power by the communists did not follow the logic of the political system as it was set up in Imperial Russia at that time. They questioned the political decision-making powers. They questioned the political decision-making institutions. They questioned them fundamentally. And by questioning them and by gaining popularity in the sense of people participating in the revolutionary politics, in the questioning of the political institutions, providing support for them, and effectively shifting the decision-making, political decision-making power within the country from the earlier imperial organization to a new revolutionary organization led by the Communist Party. They changed the whole political system of the country. The logic of power changed, and the description of the society changed fundamentally from the quasi feudal imperial country, it turned into a communist country, uh, which was aiming to provide equality to everybody, ignore class differences, distribute wealth equally, nationalize the economy, and so on. So it was a very fundamental change that was delivered by this revolution. So in general, these revolution change, or at least aim to change fundamentally, the logic of power in the society and the organization of political system in the society. So these are political communications, but do not follow the system of politics as it is established, and really aim to establish a new political system. Now, the political communications are generated to maintain and reproduce the political system as it is for any system that we discussed. The boundaries of the political system are within the society. Say some social communications belong to the political system, while others do not. Now, the expansion and the drive to expansion potentially can lead to the overgrowing of the political system, where excessively many parts of the society become dominated by political communications. Now, as we said, the kind of decision making about resources is driven by political communications, but there are many other communications within society which relate more distantly to these communications. And in some societies, politics and the political system may grow further and may become, in a sense, overgrown. Now, if that happens, that too large part of the society becomes dominated by the political system, then that is potentially damaging to the society, mainly because the other aspects of the society cannot grow, which ultimately means that the society cannot really adapt as well to its physical and kind of wider social environment as it could otherwise. So in general, the political system is expected to fit the society that is described by it. And if there is a mismatch between how the political system describes a society and how the society actually works, that leads to the questioning of the validity of the political system and may lead to a revolution, as you can see in the case of a number of countries. For example, around 1990 or after 2000 in the post-Soviet area, there were a number of countries which went through revolutions where really the political system that was in place did not match any longer the way how the society operated, how the members of society perceived the society itself. And that led to changes of the political systems in these societies. Now, the overexpansion of politics is, as I said, ultimately it leads to ignoring other parts, the kind of general rules of the society, and the domination of the society by politics makes the society less resilient and less adaptive. Generally, this happens in totalitarian systems like communism, where everything becomes a political issue. So, in a communist country, discussing about healthcare is a political issue. Discussing about how the schools are run, or how the schools operate, or how a lecturer gives a lecture, that can become a political issue, because politics permeates everything. It is a totalitarian, becomes a totalitarian substance in the sense that it is aiming to impregnate everything in a society. Now, if that happens, in general, the society becomes less adaptive, uh, less able to respond to challenges posed by its physical and also social environment. And ultimately, over some time, it may lead to the breakdown of the political system and of the society itself. However, just to note that this time until the breakdown happens can be quite long. It can be years or decades or more. Now, moving on to how individuals work in or participate in politics. What we already kind of implied is that everybody performs a communication unit for the political system. So everybody participates in the political system with some communications. Now, it is true, as again I noted, that the extent to which communication units, humans, participate in the political communications may differ. So, for example, in societies which have a caste or a class system, individuals, humans who belong to certain castes or classes, may be much more actively participating in political communications than others who belong to other classes or castes. Now, in particular, there are some humans, some communication units which produce a very large amount of political communications and a large part of the political system, and these are the politicians. The specialist human individuals which generate mainly political communications. Right, so to summarize this part, we looked at society and we discussed about political communications. We said that the political communications are the communications which decide how to interpret communications about the environment of the society and how to decide over the actions of the society on the environment, deciding how to interpret perceptions and deciding how to do the actions, what to do. We discussed across a range of societies of how politics are organized, and across all, this is what we see, that the political system decides how resources are managed in the society, and ultimately how resources are managed means how memories about human communications are managed, and how the resources are managed is driven by a logic of power which is the logic which determines how communications are used to decide actions and the perceptions of the society. And this logic of power is kind of core identity of the political system. Everything in the political system has to align with this logic of power, which is really about expressing that all political communications must relate to gaining or maintaining or losing power in the context of the logic of power. And all those communications which do not align with the logic of power, which do not reference the logic of power, they are not political communications. In this way, we define the political system as the information subsystem of the society, which provides a model of the society, and we said that this model ideally must fit the actual society, and if there is a mismatch between the society and its political system, that leads typically to the reorganization of the political system of the society. Finally, we also talked about the participation of individuals in the political system. Now, let's move to questions and answers. First question, is it true that everybody participates in the political system? And the answer is yes. That's what we said, that everybody participates in the political system, at least to some extent. Some individuals, some humans participate much more than others, but everybody has some role in general. In more or less all societies, there is some role for everybody to generate political communications. Second question, is it true that the collection of census data is an action of the political system? And the answer is that the collection of the data, it is a use of resources, use of human communications, human behaviors within society, which is an action and the use of these resources. The interpretation of the census data will be a perception of the political system within the society. Third question, is it true that a new higher education policy is an action of the political system? And again, the answer is yes. Higher education policy, it is typically expressed as a new higher education legal context, a new law possibly, which is an action of the political system because it tells how resources within the society should be used in the context of higher education. Thank you.